Every time someone challenged you and you rushed to defend yourself, every time you felt the heat rise in your chest and you explained, justified, proved your innocence like a defendant begging for mercy. Every argument where you chase their understanding, their approval, their acknowledgement that you were right, you handed them your throat and called it communication. You bled sovereignty with every desperate word, and they drank deeply while you convinced yourself you were winning. Universal truth, cold as winter stone. Weak men react and regret. Powerful men stay silent and dominate. Tonight, you master the annihilation of explanation. Once you grasp this, no accusation, no betrayal, no conflict will ever extract another drop from you. You will become the void they cannot fill, the silence that devours their certainty, the calm that transforms their aggression into self doubt. This is where boys who argue become shadows that rule. Machiavelli observed the courts of Renaissance Italy with surgical precision. He watched princes fall because they explained too much, justified their actions to those who had no right to judge them. He noted that the most feared rulers were those who made decisions and offered nothing. No defense, no reasoning, no vulnerability disguised as transparency. In The Prince, he described how explanations are invitations to challenge, how every word you speak in your own defense creates another angle of attack. The powerful sovereign acts and allows others to interpret. The weak king argues with his subjects and wonders why they smell blood. Most men today erupt like fools in conflict. They vomit words when accused, scramble to prove themselves, mistake verbal diarrhea for strength. You will not be that man. Silence is your throne. Unexplained action is your scepter. The refusal to defend yourself is the declaration that you answer to no one. Observe with clinical detachment what unfolds in their mind when you withhold words in the heat of conflict. They accuse, they attack, they demand explanation, and you, nothing. Your face remains stone. Your response never comes. In that void, something in them begins to fracture. The human mind cannot tolerate unexplained silence from someone it's trying to dominate. It reads your refusal as confidence so absolute it requires no defense. It reads your quiet as proof of guilt or proof of power so vast that their opinion is irrelevant and they cannot tell which. That ambiguity is the blade. Their cortisol spikes. The silence echoes. They begin to question their own attack. Did I overreact? Do they know something I don't? Why aren't they afraid? The aggressor becomes the anxious one. They draft messages they delete. They rehearse what they should have said. They check for your response 17 times. They tell others about the confrontation, trying to recruit validation for their position because your silence has made them doubt it. They lie awake, replaying the moment, wondering why you didn't fight back, spiraling into the abyss of interpretation. Meanwhile, you sleep like a king, unbothered, unexplained, untouched. You have become the silence that echoes in their skull. Inescapable, maddening, utterly sovereign. They fear the void where your defense should have been because the void reflects their own desperation, in their own need to be right, their own weakness for requiring your validation through argument. You have shown them their powerlessness by refusing to engage with it. When they attack, when they accuse, when they demand you justify yourself, vanish. Physically if possible, digitally if necessary, emotionally always. The withdrawal must be complete, surgical, glacial. Why it works, the human psyche interprets emotional pursuit as weakness, and emotional withdrawal as dominance. When you chase to explain, you submit. When you withdraw without words, you establish that their judgment has no jurisdiction over you. Their aggression loses its target and begins consuming itself. Sun Tzu understood that the most devastating warfare happens in the enemy's mind, not on the battlefield. He wrote that the supreme art is to subdue without fighting. Your silence is the battle they fight against themselves. You have already won by refusing to appear on their chosen ground. Ancient metaphor, like the emperor who hears accusations of treason and simply stands from his throne and walks to his chambers. No denial, no defense. The accusers are left in the hall, suddenly aware they may have sealed their own fate. The emperor's silence has transformed their attack into their own uncertainty. Say nothing. Let the absence of your words become a canvas on which they project every fear, every doubt, every insecurity they possess. They will paint masterpieces of their own destruction in the space where your explanation should have been. Why it works. The human brain abhors informational vacuums. When you refuse to provide interpretation, they generate it themselves, and self-generated interpretations always cut deepest. They imagine scenarios worse than reality. They assume knowledge you don't possess. They attribute to you a strategic depth that may or may not exist. It doesn't matter. Their imagination becomes your weapon. Machiavelli observed that it is better to be feared than loved because fear is self-sustaining, while love requires constant maintenance. Your silence generates fear because it cannot be refuted, cannot be argued against, cannot be diminished. It simply exists, vast and unknowable. Ancient metaphor, like the warlord accused of plotting rebellion, who responds to the king's summons with perfect attendance and perfect silence, never confirming, never denying. The court descends into chaos, trying to read meaning into his expressionless face. While he sits still as carved granite. Accusers begin turning on each other, desperate for certainty he will never provide, never justify, never explain your reasoning, never provide the rationale they're demanding. To explain is to submit to their right to judge you. You do not recognize that right. Therefore, you offer nothing. Why it works? Every explanation is a negotiation. Every justification implies the other person has authority to approve or disapprove. By refusing this entirely, you make a declaration of absolute sovereignty. You act according to your own code, and their understanding is irrelevant to your operation. This is deeply destabilizing to anyone attempting to control or manipulate you. Sun Tzu noted that to know your enemy while remaining unknown yourself is the path to victory. When you explain, you reveal. When you refuse, you remain opaque, operationally unpredictable, strategically unreadable. Ancient metaphor, like the prince who executes a popular advisor, and when the court demands explanation, offers only cold eyes and colder silence. The court eventually concludes the advisor must have committed treason so profound it cannot be spoken. The prince never confirms this. The advisor's reputation crumbles under the weight of unanswered questions. The prince's power grows. Your only action is observation. Watch clinically as your silence transforms their certainty into chaos. Note the stages: initial aggression, then confusion, then desperate seeking of response, then self-questioning, then collapse. Why it works. Attackers require resistance to maintain aggression. Remove resistance and aggression has nothing to push against. It folds inward. They begin doubting the validity of their own attack. If what I said was so devastating, why no response? If I was so right, why aren't they defending themselves? Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I looked foolish. Maybe they're laughing at how seriously I took this while they didn't even dignify it with acknowledgement. Machiavelli understood that appearing unaffected by attacks is more powerful than winning arguments. The prince who flinches reveals vulnerability. The prince who doesn't even register the blow reveals invincibility. Ancient metaphor, like the general accused of cowardice by younger officers, he says nothing, offers no defense, continues preparing for battle with the same measured calm. The young officers, receiving no reaction, begin to wonder if they misunderstood tactics they're too inexperienced to grasp. Their accusations become their humiliation. The general never said a word. They attacked, they accused. Now they need to know you heard them, felt it, registered it. Deny them this. Give them nothing. No confirmation that their words even reached you. Let them wonder if you were affected. Let them wonder if you even care enough to be affected. Why it works. The person who needs acknowledgement is the person without power. By refusing even basic confirmation of receipt, you demonstrate that their emotional labor has no return on investment. This is devastating. They threw their best blow and can't even confirm it landed. The uncertainty eats them alive. Sun Tzu wrote that all warfare is deception. Your silence is the ultimate deception because they cannot tell if it's strategy or genuine indifference, calculated response or authentic dismissal. This ambiguity is the torture. Ancient metaphor, like the king who receives an ultimatum from a neighboring kingdom and does not send envoys, does not send replies, does not acknowledge the message at all. The neighboring king, unsure if his message was even received or if he's being deliberately ignored, falls into paranoid strategizing that weakens his position. The silent king forced his enemy to negotiate with ghosts. Innocence does not require defense. When you explain, you imply you need to prove something. When you remain silent, you imply only the guilty scramble to justify. By saying nothing, you reverse the burden. They begin explaining themselves to fill the silence. They volunteer information. They reveal insecurities. They confess to motivations they never intended to expose. Well, why it works? Silence creates psychological pressure. Under pressure, people talk. The more uncomfortable the silence, the more they reveal. Interrogators have known this for millennia. Your refusal to engage transforms the conflict into their confession. Machiavelli noted that the appearance of virtue is often more useful than virtue itself. The appearance of calm certainty created through silence is more powerful than actual innocence defended through words. Ancient metaphor, like the ancient warlord accused of poisoning a rival. He sits at the council table, says nothing, doesn't defend, doesn't deny, just waits. The accuser, unnerved by the silence, begins over-explaining, reveals he had motive to kill the rival himself, reveals he investigated the death with suspicious thoroughness. By the meeting's end, the accuser has talked himself into suspicion while the warlord never spoke once. The final blade is opacity. Through consistent refusal to explain, through disciplined silence in every conflict, you become strategically illegible. They cannot predict you. They cannot manipulate you. They cannot even understand the game you're playing. Why it works. People can only control what they can predict. When your pattern is silence and unexplained action, you have no pattern. You become chaos to their need for order. This is deeply frightening to those who seek to dominate through social manipulation, emotional leverage, or political maneuvering. Sun Tzu's entire philosophy rests on being formless, unknowable. He wrote, "Be extremely subtle, even to formlessness. Be extremely mysterious, even to soundlessness." Thereby, you can be the director of the opponent's fate. Your silence is that formlessness, ancient metaphor, like the advisor who serves 3 emperors across 40 years of court intrigue. He never explains his counsel, never defends his positions, never reveals his reasoning. Rivals attempt to outmaneuver him and fail because they cannot read him. He becomes myth, the ghost behind the throne, untouchable because unexplained. You now possess 7 blades most men will never sharpen. They will die having bled power in every argument, every conflict, every moment someone demanded explanation and they provided it like servants. Wield them coldly, wield them without mercy, wield them in utter silence. You no longer react, you no longer explain, you no longer bleed in conflict. This is the moment you cease being the fool who argues his innocence to those unworthy of judging him, and become the shadow that commands through absence, the void that others fear to approach, the silence that echoes longer than any speech. When they attack now, you will feel the old urge to defend. The words will rise in your throat. The need to be understood will pull at you like gravity, and you will swallow it. You will let it die in your chest. You will offer them nothing but your back as you walk away, or your calm, unreadable face as you remain. They will spiral. They will chase. They will confess. They will collapse into the void where your explanation should have been. You are now untouchable. You are now silent. You are now sovereign. If this cut deep, if you felt the wound of every past moment, you explain yourself to someone who had no right to your reasoning, inscribe in the comments, "I never explained power," to seal it. Brand it into your operating system. Make it the reflex that replaces reaction. Like this, if you understand that silence is not weakness, but the ultimate declaration of strength, subscribe. If you're ready to wield every ancient blade we forge in this forge of darkness, hit notifications, because weak men need permission. And you are beyond permission. Like, weak men will argue with the screen, will justify in the comments why they have to explain, will scroll away uncomfortable with the mirror we've held up. Powerful men will act in silence, will implement immediately, will become the void starting tonight. Which one are you? In the absence of your words, empires of fear are born. The less you speak, the more they tremble. Your silence is not empty. It is full of every possible interpretation they fear most. You have become the question they can never answer, the riddle that keeps them awake, the stillness that swallows their certainty whole. Never explain power. Power explains itself through the fear it generates in those who demand explanations you'll never give.